Hello, this is Jane Goodall, and I want to say how very honored I am to have been asked to join in paying tribute to David Bamberger for all the wonderful work that he's done. And I'm sending you this message from Gombe, so I think it's only fitting that I send a distance greeting from the chimpanzees as well. Congratulations. I remember so well visiting the Bamberger Ranch. You had deliberately sought out the most degraded, the most abused, the most overgraded land in the whole of Texas. And now here it is, 5,500 acres of flourishing habitat. And I think you must be really proud of the fact that because you pioneered these methods, hundreds of other landowners and agencies and habitat managers, not only in Texas but around the nation, have followed the example. So you can probably reckon on millions of acres of land having been restored thanks to you. And I love to think of all the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of animals who are living because of you.
It's interesting, on his ranch, they had no water when he purchased that ranch probably almost 40 years ago. Now, in normal years, based on the estimates of a Parks and Wildlife Department biologist, about 1,000 to 1,500 acre feet of water leave that ranch every year. So the water that he created, it goes into Miller's Creek, into the Pedernales, and then where? It goes into the Colorado River system, so the water that is generated on David Bamberger's ranch goes right straight under Congress Avenue Bridge. All the policymakers in Austin should realize that when they turn the tap water on, they are beneficiaries of David Bamberger's efforts.
It's called Bamberger Ranch Preserve, but I would submit to you that it's not just a ranch or a preserve, it's really a campus. The most effective teaching I've done in my career has probably been on the shores of Madrone Lake or under the Lacey Oaks on a hillside when I had kids journal and really investigate what was going around them in nature. If you've had the chance to observe David in action, you realize that he is a storyteller.
It's easy to see why we have underground water.
Mostly what he's doing is trying to communicate to you how what he does and what he values plays out in the real world. A great thing about the ranch is all the people that it attracts, both learners and teachers. He has wildlife biologists come out and he becomes the student. Later on, he takes the lessons he's learned from them and teaches them to us. It is such a wide spectrum of learning. It is ecology, how everything fits together and how you have to really look at the totality in order to focus on the individual. He's done this with bats. He's done this with Texas snowbells. He's done it with lots of species that almost fell off the earth because of neglect or ignorance. And I'm afraid very few people actually know that about him.
David Bamberger has been very influential in the lives of many of our students here in AISD, especially students at Metz Elementary and J.J. Pickle Elementary. The experiences that the boys and girls have had at the ranch, being from an urban community, going out to the ranch, experiencing things that normally they wouldn't experience here in town. They actually experience what it is to go out into a setting where it's all natural and it's explained to them in detail how it works, that the life cycle, the rain cycle, the water cycle, things of that nature really allows the children to learn it and really absorb that knowledge and allows them to have a better understanding of nature and what conservation is. Case in point, the experiences that the boys and girls have had has really improved their tax scores. Last year, we went from a 60% to 83%, so it does make a big difference.
David Bamberger is one of the most interesting, innovative, entrepreneurial conservationists that's ever existed in Texas. People thought that he was crazy when he started restoring his ranch. Today, people come from all over the world to see what he's done, to see the incredible change that he's brought to that place, but more importantly, the message that it gives in terms of what you can do on your land to restore not only the habitat for wildlife, but for water. It's been a real privilege to know him, to follow him, and to see the impact that he's had on landowners all across our state and beyond.
David Bamberger is a hero to everybody in the conservation community. He has showed the public and the media and the legislature that the most important thing anyone can do for water resources is take care of the land. What he's done with his ranch is a model and should be an inspiration for all of us.
Welcome to the first stop on our tour today. The tree behind me is an ash juniper, but we call this area a cedar break. The ash juniper is commonly referred to as cedar here in the hill country, and actually a lot of parts of Texas as well, but it's not actually a true cedar. So that's why we start most of our tours right here in our cedar break, so we can talk a little bit about the ecology of the hill country and the ecology of this tree behind me. Most of the Bamberger Ranch was made up of ash juniper in 1969 when Mr. Bamberger first bought it. Now it's important to know that our community here, our ecosystem in the hill country, wants to function as a grassland savanna. So that's mixed grasslands and mixed forested. About 50-50 currently here in 2020, but historically it was probably around 60-40, maybe even closer to 70-30. It really just depends on where you go. Our bottomlands would be open, but our areas next to the creek would be covered and forested. So we had a lot of diversity here. And the story of the ash juniper tree and the story of the Bamberger Ranch all ties back to water. Water is one of the most important things that we have here in Central Texas. It's why a lot of people want to live here. It's because of our creeks and our rivers. So when we talk about the ecology of the hill country, there's a lot of different things that help keep this juniper tree in check over time, okay? One of the most important things was fire. The fire cycle in the hill country was anywhere between 2 and 7 years, depending on where you are, okay? Our bottomlands are gonna burn differently than our toplands. So the grasslands that are right on top of our perched aquifers, they would burn more often. Again, keeping that ecosystem in check. Because when that mockingbird or those cedar waxwings come through here eating those berries, there's no toilet for them. They just let it go as they fly. And every time they do, they potentially plant a juniper tree. So when you stop those natural fire cycles, you allow these little trees that when they get to this tall, the fire just wipes them out. Because when you think about our historic grasslands, they're very tall. We're a mid-grass prairie, okay? So that's a lot of fuel to carry those fires. And that's why you don't see a lot of large oak trees or large trees just in general out in the middle of the savanna. They're interspersed, but they don't make up big forests, and that's because of that natural fire cycle. The third thing that helped keep this tree in check was drought, that dreaded D word, okay? Where it seems like we're always going into a drought or coming out of a drought here in Central Texas. Well, that's how it was historically as well. And a lot of our grasses are adapted to do that. Think about when those summer rains come at the end, they green up very, very quickly. Well, being an evergreen, these ash juniper trees need a certain amount of water, okay? And if you can remember back to the 2011-2012 drought, where it was something like 14 inches across a year-long period through those 2 years, a lot of rust-colored juniper trees happened, and that's a huge fire hazard. So when we talk about water and we talk about this tree, there's a lot of misinformation out there. This tree isn't so detrimental to our ecosystem because of the amount of water it drinks. Now, it is an evergreen, so it does drink water every single day. But really what's bad about this tree is a condition like this, a closed canopy juniper or cedar forest. Because what happens in most of our rains here in the hill country, they fall about 1 inch or less. Okay, we get those big deluges, which aren't affected as much. But when we get those Irish rains, okay, we're talking half an inch across the entire day. 36% of that rainfall gets caught up in the canopy layer. Because these cedar trees, these junipers, have tiny little scales, like little tiny coffee cups. So that has to fill up, okay? Then it spills over. And what I'm standing on right now is not a nice lush grassland. I'm standing on detritus, duff, an organic layer made up of needles. There's some cow dung in here too. Last year's leaf growth from the mixed in Spanish oaks and live oaks, okay? It just forms a sponge, and that soaks up 43% of that water. So again, we're almost all the way out of water. We've only got 21% left. So that 21%, what do all these trees have underneath the ground waiting for it? Roots. So in that 1 inch rainfall, you don't have any groundwater recharge in a closed canopy cedar forest. But that same 1 inch falls on one of our many grasslands out here, and 80% reaches that subsoil level, gets into our aquifers, allows for percolation. And that's what happened here on the ranch. Mr. Bamberger cleared a lot of juniper out here, and he got the grasses established. And you'll see throughout the day the success of all of that when you see all of the water and all the stories that are tied to water throughout the ranch.
Here we are at a rain machine. Now I know what you're thinking. This is not a machine, and you'd be correct. What this is a rainfall simulator. We've got our cloud here, and mama cloud gives birth to baby clouds, and it's the same amount of water falling on two different landscapes. So what essentially we're doing here is we're modeling a juniper forest, what the ranch was 50 years ago, and a native grassland, what the ranch is now. Now, it's important to understand this. When we were in the juniper break, the cedar break earlier, I explained to you, so to review the math problem, that 43%, 36%, 21%. So to review that, in a 1 inch rainstorm, 36% gets caught in the canopy layer of an ash juniper. 43% hits the organic duff layer, the detritus, okay, like the spongy stuff that doesn't really break down. And then you've got 21% getting into the ground that is uptaken by the roots then. So in a 1 inch rainstorm, in this condition, you don't get any water. But what this machine is actually simulating is one of those 2.5 to 3 inch rains. So 2.5 to 3 inches an hour, okay? So it's more of a flooding event that we have here. So if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's run this thing and see exactly what happens. So you can see already we have some action on this juniper side.
There are two distinct pathways that the water can take. You have your runoff, which is the water that runs right off the surface and ends up down the watershed in your creek, in your river, in your lake, and eventually, for our case, the Gulf of Mexico. And you also have your groundwater. And when you think groundwater, I want you to see aquifer recharge. Okay, so that is the spring water that comes out of the hills after it's infiltrated through the soil.
All right, so let's talk about what just happened here with this experiment. So first, let's talk about 50 years ago and what a lot of the hill country still looks like today, our juniper forest. As you can see, we have mostly runoff. Okay, we got a couple drips of groundwater in there, but not a lot. Okay, so in terms of the two pathways this water can take, most of the water took the runoff. And you'll notice the runoff isn't clear. Okay, it's muddy, it's murky. And why is that? Well, it's that dreaded E word, erosion. Okay, when the water droplets came down and hit the soil, there was nothing to protect it. Okay, it's not covered here. But if you look at our grassland here, we have very little runoff, and that's because all that soil is protected. It's easy to see when my fingers hit, if they were raindrops, I have to get around all that vegetation before I can actually hit the soil. But here, I don't even have to touch anything to hit right here. I don't have to touch anything to hit right here. So the second I hit, I'm blowing that soil up and those microparticles are coming out and it's running off here. Now, why is this runoff so bad? Well, it's bad because of what happens afterwards. Not only is it going to make like our lakes and our rivers and our creeks murky and muddy, that silt is eventually going to settle out. And when that settles out, it's going to make whatever body of water it lands in that much more shallow. So if you think about Mansfield Dam, every time we get a large flooding event with runoff, what happens? Well, the reservoir gets a little bit shallower each time. When you think about the Gulf of Mexico, if you go down to Galveston, why is it so murky? It's because of all the runoff that's coming down from the Mississippi. So it's not just the Colorado, it's also the Mississippi, which is clouding that up. But here with our grassland, what little runoff we do have is clean, but really what the key to the whole of this is, it's right here, is the groundwater. That's what we want. Having the roots of the grass available allows that water to infiltrate and percolate down through our perched aquifers and get into the ground. And that's what gives us spring flow. So again, because of our Edwards limestone, our honeycomb rock that sits beneath our grass, it allows, okay, the roots get in and it allows that water to go through. Where here, there's nothing to slow that water down. So there's nothing to allow that water to actually seep into the soil and come out as groundwater. It's mostly runoff in a juniper forested condition, whereas it's mostly groundwater or the runoff is clean. Grass is the greatest conservation tool we have in North America for water. We don't actually let anybody leave the ranch without watching this demonstration, so I hope you enjoyed our virtual rain machine.
Good morning. My name is Stephen Fulton, and what you're seeing behind me is a herd of Scimitar horned oryx. They originate from the Sahel grasslands of Africa, which is the southern parts of the Sahara Desert that get just enough rainfall to provide a sparse grassland. Mr. Bamberger became involved with the Scimitar horned oryx in the early 80s, which at that time they were extinct in the wild, and after that for about 35 years also considered to be extinct in the wild until just recently. So Mr. Bamberger, with his association with the San Antonio Zoo, heard about the plight of this animal and decided that he wanted to try to help this animal and recover this animal and with the conservation of this animal. In the early 80s, I'm not sure exactly what year, 83, 84, somewhere around there, Mr. Bamberger was in conjunction with the AZA, which is the Aquarium Association of Zoo and Aquariums, partnered with them. He set aside 640 acres of the Bamberger Ranch, dedicated just to the species survival program for the Scimitar horned oryx. They brought him 24 animals, and those 24 animals represented 31 different bloodlines. Today we are still working to conserve this animal, and not just the physical conservation, but also conserving the genetic diversity of this animal. So you may have noticed that many of these animals have ear tags. That's a way we can mark one animal separate from the other so we can give them all an individual identity. That way we can ensure that we don't introduce animals together that are related, and we don't want to introduce inbreeding into our population. Some interesting things about the Scimitar horned oryx, as a desert animal, living in sparse desert grasslands where they come from, they are actually very low maintenance. As long as you have green grass, you really don't even need water for them to drink as far as a water trough or a stock tank. They get all the moisture they require from the green grass they're eating. Of course, we do have water available for them here. They are also very, very accustomed to our hot, dry summers, and they are also, if you noticed, they do have some impressive headgear, and those weapons they can bring into action very quickly. And they are one of the few species of antelope that have been recorded actually injuring and killing African lions in defense of themselves and their young. So though we have them in captivity, we are very careful as we are around them, because they can use those horns with proficiency. They are a true horned animal. So if they ever do break a horn off, it will not grow back, which is not a problem here, but as you can imagine, in the African setting, that would be nearly a death sentence, because they would have no way of defending themselves. We are working with the genomics, partnered with the Smithsonian and another organization that we're a member of, called the Source Population Alliance. And our goal is to map the genome, and that way we can determine exactly their lineages. In case paperwork or documentation was lost in the past, we can recreate that lineage, that pedigree, for each animal that we have. We have about 60 animals here on the ranch today. Over 30 of those are young ones that were born in the last 6 weeks. And that's also an exciting time, because each one of those young animals has to be marked for future identification. And the best way to do that is to catch them when they're just a day old or 2 days old. And as you can imagine, the mothers don't really like that. So our procedure for doing that is driving out in the pasture, finding the baby, jumping out of the truck, grabbing the baby up, and jumping back in the truck before the mama can get back to us and try to impale us with her horns. It does, however, make the identification of the mother of that baby pretty easy. She is obviously the one trying to kill you. But we record that information, and for each herd of females that we have, there's only one bull put with each of the herds, so we know who daddy is, and through that process of identifying the baby and ear tagging the baby, we know who the mom is too. So we keep those records, pretty strict about keeping those records. The only other time that they are potentially dangerous to us and harmful to us is when we bring them into our working facility once a year to separate out babies, or at that point in time they'll be 10-month-old juveniles. Separate those out, and also give them a little medication to make sure that they stay healthy. So at that point in time, we have to separate each animal out individually, which they really don't, as a herd animal, they really don't like to be by themselves. So they resist that. Thank goodness we have protective equipment that helps us with that. Other good news about this animal, other than them being protected and conserved here on the Bamberger Ranch, is they have been, since 2016, there have been 150 animals, 150 Scimitar horned oryx released into a game reserve in Chad. And of those, and the results from those releases is that now there are babies, there are calves being born in the wild. So those calves born in the wild in that game reserve in Chad are considered to be wild-born Scimitar horned oryx. So hopefully their designation as far as extinct in the wild will soon change because of that the good works that's going on in that game reserve. There's a lot more that we could talk about with the Scimitar horned oryx. I could talk to you about them for hours. That's the high points. We will continue to raise the animals here and try to do our best to conserve the species and their genetic diversity. Thank you for your time. We'll see you next time.
Jared here for the BRP, and with me today is a special guest. He's somebody that's been helping us out throughout the pandemic. Zach Chambers. Zach, tell us a little something about yourself.
Well, I'm a photographer, now a videographer, based out of Houston, Texas. It just so happened that my stepdad was chairman of the board of Bamberger Ranch. I think he's been that for
A couple of years now.
A couple of years now. So when the whole pandemic hit, I kind of had the opportunity to come out here and basically quarantine myself, which ended up being kind of a blessing because I was able to not only practice my craft, but also, learn a lot of stuff about the ranch and nature and all sorts of things, really.
Yeah. So have you always been connected to nature?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, I used to go outside as a kid. I used to play in the woods all the time and, read about it. And I wasn't necessarily obsessed with it, but I always had some kind of connection to it. But then it kind of, I don't know, I've been living in cities for a while, and I think it kind of went to the wayside just a little bit. But
So has being out here at the ranch kind of helped you reconnect with that?
absolutely. And being surrounded by people that are really into it and have a lot of knowledge of, plants, animals, everything,
Yeah.
grass, water.
Yeah, it's kind of overwhelming, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So being a still photographer, what has it been like to essentially learn an entirely new skill? We kind of just threw you into this when Rusty said, hey, Zach's coming out. He's a photographer, but he'll do videos. And we were like, oh, okay. So how's that experience kind of shaped your experience out here at the ranch?
It's been kind of easy because there was no it's not a client breathing down my neck for a deadline or something like that. So in that sense, it's been kind of nice because I've been able to slowly learn the software and the organizational aspect and the sound, and there's a lot that goes into it. It's been nice to have that kind of leeway going into it.
Yeah. So you mentioned all the different aspects of it. What is the part that you like the most, and what is the part that you like the least?
I always prefer shooting, setting up the shot, finding the angle, just that whole idea of it. But everything else can become kind of tedious, like especially editing. It takes a very long time, and sound is, it's finicky, and there's an art to that as well. But I'm, coming from a still and photography side, like I'm so used to being behind the camera. That's where I'm comfortable.
Yeah.
So everything else is kind of, it's
Yeah.
just not as natural for me.
No, I understand. So for all of you out there, if you really like the videos that we've been producing, Zach has put in a tremendous amount of work on that. And it is not easy, like he said. Still photography, to me at least, is a lot easier than producing these videos. So is there a special moment that you want to share that has happened out here at Sela while you've been here?
I don't think there's any specific moment. I've spent so much time out here that it's just there's so many things that I've done and experienced with. There's a lot of people out here that all have different characteristics and all have different skill sets and knowledge. So just my individual experiences with those people have all been really, fascinating and really fun. Whether it be, going out with you, picking up rocks or doing video work, or, looking for herps, or going out doing the bees with Steven, or, sunset photo shoots with Rusty. You know, it's all been really nice.
That's great. Spoken like a true portrait photographer, you know. It's all about the connection with the people. So, well, Zach, I really appreciate your time out here and all your hard work that you've done for the ranch and all these videos and our Cellist Spectacular Picnic-a-thon. Is there anything you want to leave us with?
Just, you know, if you get the chance, I think everyone should come out here and visit.
There are very significant natural resource challenges facing the coming generations of Texans. We got to find enough water for not only for our growing population, but for the environment. We have to find a way to keep children outside so that they begin to love the outdoors, to appreciate it, and understand that they need to take care of it. There are clearly changes taking place in the climate. But the most serious terrestrial natural resource issue that we face in Texas is a continued breakup of family land. Texas is more than 95% owned by private citizens. And that means that all of our watersheds, all of our aquifer recharge areas, all of our wildlife habitat, all of the areas that we depend on to sequester carbon, and all of our open space virtually is owned by private citizens. But we lose rural and agricultural land here in Texas faster than any other state. Between 1997 and 2007 alone, we lost more than 2 million acres of rural and agricultural lands to other uses. We must find a way to keep private landowners on the land and doing the right thing. In that context, the work here at CELA is a beacon of hope. It's a place where landowners can learn the joys of taking care of private property, the fact that it's important, that it doesn't necessarily involve economic sacrifice. But unless we can figure out a way to keep landowners on the private lands of Texas and doing the right thing, then we're going to lose all of the values we get from well-protected private lands. You know, we often think of land protection as being a function of government purchase of land for state parks and national parks and wildlife refuges, and I would always be an advocate for more of that. But we can't buy enough land to solve this problem. We have to find landowners who, like the folks who have done such a wonderful job here at CELA, who are willing to stay on the land and do the right thing.